You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast, coming to you from Santa Barbara, California, part of Santa Barbara called Montecito. We are an unincorporated part of Santa Barbara that apparently now we have royalty here. We have Prince Harry and Meghan Markle that just moved in. I'm very excited. I'm just kidding. Anyway, that's the latest news here. It's kind of funny. But they're moving in. So hopefully I can, run into Harry at the gym or something like that. But anyway, hey, listen, this is an episode of Ask Buck today. So there is you know how this works. Basically, you guys write in a bunch of questions, you record questions. There is an awful lot of them this time around. So I suspect we're going to have multiple shows. I'm guessing probably at least 2, maybe even 3 shows. And that's cool. I enjoy this. I think these are really useful in terms of the educational aspect. It's good sometimes to just back up and, talk about the concepts over and over again. But before we start that, I do want to remind you that there is a website called wealthformula.com. That's where you can go to pick up a lot of free stuff, like free books, 7 Secrets of Eternal Wealth. You can get that book there. That's sort of a Wealth 1.0 book. And if you're a starter in this space, you can get a copy of George Newberry's book. The lots of lists to sign up for. The one I would highly encourage you to sign up for is if you are an accredited investor, to sign up for the Investor Club, because that is where the magic happens. If you listen to this show and you like these concepts, you really need to be putting them to play. And by signing up for the Investor Club at wealthformula.com, you can start doing that. Now, what is an accredited investor? As a reminder, $200,000 per year for 2 years in a row. That's what you make, or $300,000 if you're filing jointly. There's nothing that you need to apply for. It's accredited sounds kind of fancy, but really either you're accredited or you're not, kind of like either you're pregnant or you're not. If you are, sign up for the Investor Club at wealthformula.com. So with that being said, when we come back, let's start our first round of August Q&A session, Ask Buck. Welcome back to the show, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ask Buck. I will say that one of the things that people ask me all the time is, okay, well, where do I start with this stuff? I had a friend of mine visiting from San Francisco, and he's a very, very smart guy, one of the very, very smart guy, works for Apple, etc. But this is not his space, and he we were talking a lot about some of the concepts we deal with on a regular basis here. And he said, well, what do I read? And I said to him, I might start with like the cash flow quadrant or something like that, right? Because that's really sort of gives you some of the basic fundamentals. But I can't think of any book right now off the top of my head that really goes into the types of granular detail on, okay, once you get the big picture, you read Kiyosaki, et cetera. Now, how can I put some of these things into action? I do believe, quite honestly, that we have the best show when it comes to alternative investing strategies and that kind of thing. Anyway, with that being said, let's start. We're going to do all voice questions this week, and I'm doing it a little bit different. Usually I spend a bunch of time listening and having prepared answers, but I'm going to make this more conversational this time. So first question here, I'm going to roll.
Hey, Buck, how's it going? I'm a big fan of your work and the content you put out. I had a question about a comment you made on your podcast with Dante Andrade. You made a comment that you and your investment partners, maybe not including Dante, as it seems he might have some investments in Oklahoma, had made a conscious decision not to invest in the state of Oklahoma. I'm an ER doctor living and working in California, but I am from Oklahoma originally. My spouse and I have been looking into investing in single-family homes in Oklahoma, given my connections to the state and the low cost of the homes located there. I know you're very busy and understand if you don't have time to answer this question, but could you possibly elaborate on why you decided not to invest in Oklahoma I'm curious because it is a red state with similar politics to the other states you mentioned you invest in, including Arizona, Texas, and Florida. Any response would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for all you do.
Adam, that is actually a great question. And there's a few different reasons that I'm not a big fan of Oklahoma as an investment market. And part of it is just, the fact that I have a certain kind of buy box and I have a certain kind of desire for, certain kinds of performance. So the issue with Oklahoma, in my view, is that there really is no true significant demographic growth. There's not a huge amount of growth in terms of, different industries. There's a fair amount of oil dependence, but it's not like a Dallas, Fort Worth, or, Phoenix, Scottsdale, where, the U-Haul numbers of people moving in are like off the charts. And when you have like huge population growth, that is usually because of jobs. And when those people need to move in, that's usually when there's a need for housing. And then ultimately that pushes up prices on rents. And when rents go up, that increases the prices of our assets, right? Because we're driving up NOI, cap rates become more compressed in those areas, et cetera. Now, what happened over the last couple of years was that these markets that I think that I'm describing that are very, in my opinion, very desirable, like the Dallas, Fort Worth, the Houston, Phoenix, Scottsdale, or even, Atlanta, some of the Florida markets. The thing is that everybody's buying stuff there. So the cap rates were compressing more and more and more. And that forced a lot of people to go into what I would call tertiary markets, Oklahoma City being one of them. And even in Oklahoma City, you're seeing some level of compression, cap rate compression. But the difference in that market is that there really is no fundamentals to back up that compression. Okay. So that's why I did not want to go anywhere near Oklahoma City, at least from the multifamily standpoint. Now, understand, too, that my buy box is really something where I can add value and where we think that we can continue to increase rents and then ultimately divest because of, we've driven up NOI. Tertiary markets are not all bad, right? The thing is that I would say that if you're looking, the area, this is your space, except, and it's your backyard, it. Understand that Oklahoma City and other tertiary markets, I think you can sometimes look at them more as coupon cutters, right? So say, for example, you buy a property for $75,000, $100,000, which is, I know you can do that in some of these markets. Just don't expect that property to appreciate very much, right? It may not appreciate much at all in the next 10, 15 years. If you're looking at it purely as a yield play that you're just going to hold on to and, collect coupons and say, 7-8% per year or whatever, and you're okay with that, then by all means. It's just not part of what we do. And I think from the standpoint of multifamily in commercial real estate, it's in my opinion is not a very good business. But coupon clippers in your own backyard, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. But I certainly wouldn't go in there and create a big business plan around Oklahoma City. Hopefully that answers your question. All right, let's see. Next question.
Hi, Buck. This is Eric from San Diego, longtime listener and part of the Investor Club. Just want to thank you for all you do with the podcast and Investor Club, bringing all the great investment opportunities to the community. So my question is, with 5G still in the early development stages here in the United States, have you looked into any related investment opportunities such as data centers or cell towers? And if so, are you aware of any syndication opportunities out there? Thanks, Buck.
Thank you, Eric. Let me answer it this way. I think that, we in an investor club, with me sort of leading that investor club thesis on investing, we start with what we know, and what I know is, this space and apartment buildings really well. We're doing really, really, really well in that, as you know, and we're doing some self-storage as well. However, I think that over the course of the next decade, we are going to start looking at some things that are more opportunistic. I think for the last few years, our group I have specifically been concerned about the fact that we were in the longest expansion of GDP in U.S. history, that some sort of, recession was imminent, and therefore decided not to do anything that I considered sort of a little bit more of a shiny object or something like that. However, the data center issue that you bring up is something that smart money is looking at. I had lunch with a guy who represents a big Chinese investor group, and they're buying up data centers across the country right now. So do I know of any syndications or groups and stuff like that doing that at our retail level? I do not. However, that doesn't mean that we may not get involved in this kind of thing ourselves in the next couple of years. One thing that I'll say is that what our group is going to start focusing on is going to be based on a post-COVID economy. And I think a post-COVID economy means coming off of a very steep recession and knowing that we have some runway, knowing that there's going to be things that are discounted. We're not seeing any discounts in multifamily. In fact, we're seeing cap rate compression right now, but we may see some discounts in things that we know are going to come back. We may see technologies like towers and stuff that we know, hey, we can buy this now, and we think that the economy is going to boom in the next 10 years. So yeah, I think it's all on the table. Data centers are definitely on my big list of possibilities. That including, I'm also potentially looking at the hotel market, and I'm not talking about offshore stuff. I'm just talking about basic stuff, like local small hotels, that you would stay in, like the Hiltons and things like that are just getting crushed right now. And we'll have a show on that pretty soon. But that could be another space as well. But yeah, to answer your question right now, I don't know enough about it, but it is something that we will look into. But thanks for your question. All right, next question.
Hi, Buck. This is Eric from San Diego. I have an interesting question for you, a little off topic, but I know you're a sports fan. So do you think the NFL could pull off a reasonably successful 2020 season if they adopt some of the NBA strategies? For example, all the NBA players, coaches, refs, and support staff are located in basically a bubble environment down in Florida right now for the season. And maybe the NFL could adopt this strategy by NFL division or even conference in combination with a shortened schedule. Maybe that could lead to a successful season. It does seem like Major League Baseball is struggling in comparison to the NBA. So just as a fellow sports fan and retired medical professional, I was just curious of your thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, it's funny, Eric. I think these are the kinds of questions I think about a lot too. As you know, I'm a big sports fan. Yeah, I think the challenge, in my opinion, that's going to happen with the NFL is that a lot of these guys, unlike professional basketball and unlike professional baseball, a lot of these guys have really, these guys are overweight. A lot of them have got these massive, body mass indexes. And so that's what creates, I think, additional risk for them. And you're seeing that. I think, some of these guys opting out, and they know they're kind of overweight, and they're, overweight and African-American. Those are, a couple of what seems to be right now fairly significant risk factors once you get COVID, having some bad outcomes. I am hopeful that given their, what they're doing right now, and, they're being careful, that we can have a season. But honestly, I don't know. I mean, the reality is if they, I think the problem is, I think once you get one guy on a team who's got COVID and they've been practicing with them, I don't know what they're going to do they're going to have to quarantine for a couple weeks. It's going to be a big mess. Let's just hope for the best. And, but yeah, I'm with you. The sports is kind of freaking me out a little bit. Although I will say that I am kind of enjoying baseball again. I haven't watched baseball since the old strike back in the 90s. I used to be a Minnesota Twins fan. When I was in high school and middle school, they won a couple World Series. I used to love watching baseball. Stopped watching it altogether, but now it's like the only thing that I really, there's hockey now. I don't really have a hockey team, but the Dodgers are kind of fun to watch. Anyway, thanks for the question. Let's move on here.
So my question is, definitely a first world problem type of question, and we're really grateful for everything that we have. As a dual physician household, my husband is graduating radiation oncology residency next year, and I've been in practice subspecialized for 6 or 7 years, trying to improve on the financial side of things since we have a 2-year-old now, and trying to balance work and some of these investments. Trying to think about, what is best. Is it best for us to get rep status, one of us to get rep status, which would mean cutting back on work and, I guess owning real estate, forcing that appreciation, increasing our net worth that way, or, doing that to some extent, just enough to get rep status and then kind of putting the rest of our efforts into syndications, because at that point, once I have rep status, or one of us has rep status, we could shelter the syndication losses would be active losses, as far as I'm thinking, and therefore we could shelter active income. I guess that's my biggest thing, trying to figure out at what income number, where does that, is it, and I guess that also depends on the type of properties I'm able to find, but I haven't really sat down to do the math yet, just because I don't know what opportunities I'll have available to me whenever we pick our next place to move, once my husband graduates next year. Kind of a lot of moving parts. Also, I'm thinking, W-2 employees don't have many deductions. Maybe I should look at a 1099 position, work part-time and 50%, and then be able to do some of the, purchasing of property, get rep status, and then also do a combination of that and syndications, both as limited and general partner. That was kind of my main question. And then as a secondary question, any thoughts on conservation easement? Has anybody done it, tried it? Does it work? I know there are some pitfalls that I've read about, but all of this is in theory and just trying to look for somebody who's done it in real life. Appreciate your time and energy into this question. Thank you so much for answering this question.
Thanks for the question. There's a few different ones there, and let me just clarify. When she's talking about rep status, REP, she's talking about the real estate professional status. So this is an IRS designation that basically, if your activity if you have material activity in real estate of 750 hours or more per year, and that you don't do anything else more than that, that you are considered what's called a real estate professional. Now, the value of that is, hey, say you're married to, say you're a real estate professional and you have a spouse who is a high-paid W-2 professional. Because you're filing jointly, all of these passive losses that you would get as a real estate professional that ordinarily would have to stay in the passive basket and could not be applied against W-2 income could then actually be applied. So it's actually a huge opportunity for people who fit this category. I mean, for example, if you had $100,000 of bonus depreciation, one spouse did, and the other spouse was making $300,000 or $400,000 a year, that K1 showing that $100,000 loss could be applied against the W-2 and decrease AGI. Without that real estate professional designation, that loss, that passive loss, could not be applied against the W-2. So that's the whole concept that Jyoti's trying to get at. You will have to do the math on this because I think it depends on a lot of things. But I will tell you that a number of people in our group have made a conscious decision where one spouse, because they were involved in real estate already and they realized that maybe they were making, one spouse was making a lot more than the other. And, the one who was making less was like, well, we actually would come out making more money on at least if you think about it, how much you take home, at least, if we could just have those deductions from the real estate activity rather than taking the, 50, 75 grand, whatever the spouse is making, you might end up with, a $200,000 deduction against a $400,000 income. So those kinds of things, I mean, honestly, it's just about sitting down and doing the math. I don't know that there's a magic number or magic way to do that other than to, figure out. But generally speaking, this will be advantageous if one spouse is making significantly more. And again, we're talking about, a few $100,000 on one side and maybe 50,000 or 75 on the other. Well, you're probably better off, just really focusing on real estate and trying to get the real estate professional designation, building your net worth with real estate, and ultimately taking those deductions along the way. To your question about, potentially just decreasing hours, and being a 1099, I think being a 1099 in general over being a W-2 is going to be advantageous no matter what. I mean, you really, if you have an entity that is receiving the 1099, you got to make sure you do that so you don't end up with a bunch of self-employment taxes. Do an S selection. You're going to be in much better shape. You're going to be able to do a lot more stuff than you are as a W-2. Let me just back up here and let you know that I am not a CPA. I'm not a tax professional, so don't take anything I am saying as tax advice. I don't want to have you guys come and try to sue me or anything like that. But this is what this is my understanding, and I think part of what you may need to do is you may need a very good a CPA, because a lot of these things ultimately coming, your decisions on, becoming a real estate professional, whether or not you'll use a 1099 versus, being a W-2 versus, the conservation easement option that you brought up, all of these are highly reliant on a CPA who's confident and feels comfortable with you doing these types of things. There's nothing illegal about what we're talking about, but not all CPAs are created equally. As to your question about conservation easements are a hot topic. The IRS sees them as sort of, blatant tax mitigation or tax avoidance. And we've talked about them before, but in effect, what happens is, you give up, you buy into property. That property that instead of going into development gives up its rights for building on. And because of that, you can take the deduction. Typically, that's on the valuation of the property that would be there. That's a mouthful. Go listen to it again. But bottom line is, what it has allowed people to do in the past is, if you had an investment of, or say $100,000 or something, potentially take a deduction, up to 4 or 5 times that because the valuation came out that way. I'm not going to talk about it too much right now. It's a hot button issue. We will have more clarity on it later. I will say yes. Many people in our group have done this. The devil is in the details. You have to use a reputable group. You have to use a reputable operator. This is the wild, wild west. And if you're not careful, you'll do something wrong, and it'll end up costing you a lot of money. That's the bottom line. Conservation easements are real. They're used left and right by the affluent. And if you are, part of Investor Club, if you're an accredited investor, we talk about this stuff, and we'll continue to talk about this in the next year. If you're not accredited, you're not going to be able to participate in anything like this anyway. So hopefully that's helpful. I know I was just being a little bit circuitous about answering that, but that's it's a little tricky on that one. So, okay, here's another question from Eric.
Hi, Buck. This is Eric in San Diego, longtime listener and part of the Investor Club. First off, just like to thank you for all the great content and credible guests you have on your show, as well as all the investment opportunities you bring to the Investor Club community. So my question is, it is often described that there are really only 4 asset classes: paper, business, real estate, and commodities. So which of those would you say is the best for cash flow investing? What might be the best for growth or appreciation investing? And what might be the best for just simply wealth preservation? Thanks, Buck.
Okay. Yeah, it's not an easy question, Eric. And a lot of it's just because I'm biased, right? I mean, let's just try to do this methodically. But if you look at what you're talking about, okay, well, let's start with cash flow, okay, and go down the list that you talked about: businesses, commodities, paper, real estate. I think that if you own a business, it's going to probably be the highest. If you have a successful business, and from my personal experience, that is your opportunity for the highest level of cash flow. But it is often highly volatile and risky. Other than that, of course, commodities, really not going to get any cash flow there. Paper is going to be dividend stocks or something like that. That's about it. So bing, 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 bing. It looks like, I think real estate probably is in my opinion, your best opportunity for cash flow. That is, reasonable yield, but yet still pretty safe. That's not to undervalue businesses, because I will tell you, if you can be an entrepreneur and you can do some high, cash flowing businesses, definitely a great way to go. But I don't really consider businesses as the way I do them. I don't really consider them investments as much as vehicles where I'm generating income to then use for investments. In other words, my businesses actually fund my investments. So that's the way I look at it. As far as, growth and appreciation, again, if you are somebody who can take a business from scratch and, turn it into something of value, then you can get huge valuations. But again, it is one of those things where, it's not easy to do. It's not really, in my opinion, necessarily an investment. Obviously, if you're a limited partner and you can get in early on something, then great. But again, high risk, potentially high reward, because again, you're dealing with valuations and business. You may get lucky and invest in the next Facebook, the next unicorn, etc. But more often than not, you're going to invest in things that fail and you lose all your money. But so business for growth and appreciation, I would say that. Commodities, well, gold. I don't know that I would call it growth and appreciation. If you look over the last 20 years or 30 years, I mean, from an inflation standpoint, I don't know that it's really moved at all. Paper, growth and appreciation, again, stocks and stuff like that. Sure. I mean, I think that, growth and appreciation, at least from a statistical standpoint, having a portfolio of stocks has been worthwhile for that. But again, for me, that growth and appreciation, I mean, if you look at what we're doing, and in Investor Club, we're getting growth, we're getting appreciation. It's enormous amounts of growth and appreciation we're getting without frankly, as much volatility. And again, just having, real assets. So again, real estate wins for me there again. Finally, for wealth preservation, I think, I don't think business is necessarily, in my view, are wealth preservation tools. Okay, gold, commodities, you talk about gold, sure. I mean, I think statistically or historically, we should say, if you look at gold, it's probably the greatest wealth preservation tool in the history of the world, right? Because in the times of Christ, an ounce of gold would buy you a nice toga, and a pair of sandals. And now an ounce of gold will buy you a pretty nice suit and a pair of shoes. So there is that wealth preservation aspect for gold in particular. I don't know. Paper, I think it's, it depends. I mean, yeah, I think if you look historically again in the stock market over time, it has grown, right? So, but I would say if you're talking about, if you invested it in something now and didn't plan on divesting for 100 years from now, it might be better to be in gold if your purpose was to preserve wealth. The last part of that, though, again, for wealth preservation, and I've made this point several times on this show before, and I'll still stand by it, is that the value of gold is a real asset and ultimately a hedge against inflation. And, it's sort of the anti-dollar. That's my view. And I think that's the view of a lot of people. And to me, I don't see a significant difference if you're talking about, holding real estate versus holding gold. I don't see a big difference. I don't see why I would hold gold instead of real estate. And in fact, I don't hold gold because real estate, again, is a massive hedge against inflation. If you look at what a lot of foreign groups are doing, they just go in Dallas and they plop down $25-30 million and buy an apartment building and it's barely cash flowing, but they don't care because they're just looking at it as a big piece of gold. That's what they're looking at it as. So again, for wealth preservation, I would say real estate and for me personally, real estate, but also gold. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. I think different people will give you different takes on that. All right, let's see. Next question.
Hi, Buck. This is Kevin calling from San Jose, California, just so near you. Thank you so much for your podcast. I've only recently found it and been listening every day on my commute to work, and it's been a real, like an earthquake for me. A little bit about myself. I'm in my early 30s. I'm a physical therapist, so a more modest income than maybe most of your listeners, but still hoping to learn from high net worth individuals like yourself on how to think about building wealth. So out of school, I was given the script of try to max out my 401k, contribute to a Roth IRA, don't get life insurance, 6 months emergency fund and savings account, invest in low-cost index fund, and buy a house as soon as I can, which where I live is just, Anyway, I was wondering what you would suggest I do to transition into a more wealth formula mindset. Should I stop contributing to my 401k and Roth IRA and put money into whole life insurance and things like real estate crowdfunding? Do you have a 6-month emergency fund, or do you use your life insurance cash balance for emergencies? Any insight on these mainstream personal finance scripts would be greatly appreciated. You are really an inspiration, and I don't wish for much. I just that maybe one day I can live a more financially free life. Thanks.
Well, hey, thanks for the question. Again, I want to just start out by saying I won't give you financial advice per se. I can just give you some thoughts, but don't think of it as advice because, again, I am not a certified financial planner, and apparently that if you do that, 3 months or so, you can give advice, but I'm not going to give advice. So listen, here's what I'll tell you. I think that it's a change in mindset, right? You live in San Jose. Houses are very, very expensive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are ways to invest outside of the traditional paradigm, in ways that you don't even have to be accredited. I mean, let's just take our sponsor, AHP Servicing, for example. I mean, these guys are pushing out, 10% annualized, or 10% per year. And you get a monthly check, and it's something that you can participate in, right? That is an income yielding product. I do think that going back to my own roots as being a resident, my own thinking was very much of, okay, how do I start building assets? How do I create assets? I think in your situation, it's a little bit hard because, buying real estate, cash flowing real estate in Silicon Valley is no joke. But the thing is that there's the saying that, live where you want to live, invest where it makes sense. And so you need to start looking at that. There are various ways to, begin that process, even if it means, investing in turnkey type properties, et cetera. So I think there's lots of opportunities for somebody who's not, high net worth to get, to change their paradigm a little bit. So I don't think you're stuck there. As far as the 401ks and all that and the IRAs and stuff, here's my take. And again, this is my opinion, right? So let's talk about, the idea of using a 401k or an IRA. The concept is that you're going to defer, today's taxes and pay them later in life, right? So there's a couple of assumptions there that I don't like. One is that when people give you these kinds of great numbers and projections of financial advisors, they presume that the tax rates are not going to be higher when you retire. And assuming you're in your 30s or 40s or whatever, I would ask you to look at the condition that our country's in right now. I think $23 trillion now in debt. It is a huge budget deficits, et cetera. And we're really at a point in history in the U.S. where we're at probably the lowest tax rate we've ever been at. So the question is, do you think paying tax now, while taxes are relatively low, makes sense, or do you want to wait until they're much higher? I would personally think that if you've got to pay them, I would pay them now, and not think of this as a tax deferment for the future when taxes are going to be a lot higher, in my opinion. So in that regard, if you're choosing between an IRA and a Roth IRA, I would take the Roth. Okay. Now, that being said, a Roth IRA doesn't do you any more good than a permanent life insurance policy does. Specifically speaking about wealth formula banking or, leveraged IUL like Velocity Plus, you can check both of those webinars out at wealthformulabanking.com. In my opinion, again, this is me, and I don't have an IRA. I do not have a 401k, but I do have a lot of permanent life insurance products. And it's not just for my kids. It's for me and growth and retirement. But if you look at what, Wealth Formula Banking does for you, or what Velocity Plus can do for you, it's like having a Roth on steroids without restrictions. So again, emphasizing that I'm not giving you financial advice. Personally, rather than contributing to these things, I would be looking at the Wealth Formula Banking products. Now, the exception to that is in some situations, if you have an actual match from your employer, well, then you really have to do the math there, because then it gets a little bit trickier. Because I think if somebody's going to give you more money, and they match you dollar per dollar, which I've seen these kinds of things, then I think the idea of doing the more traditional, the traditional route of qualifying funds might make more sense. The math might make more sense than that. Anyway, hopefully that answers your question. But good luck to you. I think one thing that Tom Wheelwright says to me and says to people in general. Tom said this to me many years ago. And he said it to many people who have changed their situation is, if you want to change your tax, you got to change your facts. So, learn what the tax law is, learn about the cash flow quadrant, read, Kiyosaki's book. And if you're compelled to do so, start making some changes in your life that will help you with your financial goals, because, not everybody needs to quit their day job. Most people shouldn't quit their day job, but a lot of people can significantly improve, their quality of life, their financial situation, just by understanding what, the quadrant is and what the tax laws are and how you can keep more of your money or make more money. Okay, let's see.
Hi, Buck. I see that the 2020 charitable contribution limit was increased to 100% of AGI. I'm wondering if the non-cash, for example, conservation easement limit has gone up with that also. Thanks.
Terry, good question. In fact, I think we just talked about this in Wealth Formula Network yesterday. And by the way, if you're interested, Wealth Formula Network is our private group. It starts out with a course, and then we have this biweekly Zoom video calls, and we also have a Facebook group, etc. It's a tight group. If you like this kind of stuff, you'll definitely love that group. If you want to check it out, go to wealthformularoadmap.com. We'd love to have you there. Terry, as far as your question goes, again, I'm not a tax professional. I am not a CPA and therefore not qualified to give you an answer. However, I will tell you that I asked the question of my CPA myself, and unfortunately, that limitation, increase in limitation for charitable giving does not apply to conservation easements. So again, conservation easements are this magical tool that have been used by the wealthy. Basically, the idea is you are donating the rights of building on land. You're giving those up in exchange for a deduction of the valuation for the potential of that land. So, for example, you may have a property that you acquired for $1 million, and there's a bunch of mining capability. There's a bunch of ore or precious stuff underneath the ground, and you say, I'm not going to drill for that stuff, and I'll never drill that, and there's a value to that, and all of a sudden the value might be that land and everything included in it might actually be $5 million instead of the $1 million that you paid for it. So by giving up those rights, you could potentially take a deduction of $5 million instead of the $1 million. Anyway, that's the concept with conservation easement. Once again, it is something that the IRS hates. There's a lot of controversy around it. We'll be talking about it more in Investor Club. There are some other things that might be, potentially a little bit less controversial. Anyway, that's it, I think, for this week of questions, because we've got a bunch more, but I think we'll start over next week. And so with that, we'll be right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I want to thank you for listening to this week's Wealth Formula podcast and the Ask Buck episode. And I know we haven't gotten even close to answering all these questions, so we will do it again next week. In the meantime, I just do want to remind you that if you like this kind of Q&A, these kinds of, all this information, people asking questions, people getting stuff, this is really how you learn, right? I really do encourage you to consider joining Wealth Formula Network. It's a tight group. We have these bi-weekly Zoom video calls. People really enjoy. I think it's for people who really like getting into the personal finance stuff, but they, maybe their neighbors or their family, they're not really into it. So this is kind of their safe haven. But anyway, definitely people who are in it, they love it. I would highly encourage you checking it out as well at wealthformularoadmap.com. That's it for me this week on Wealth Formula Podcast. This is Buck Joffrey signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.